but the walls were indifferent. The house was neutral. And the legal reality was immutable. His wife, who had always appeared confident and composed, now stood frozen in place. She glanced at him, her expression unreadable, and then at me, her eyes widening slowly as she absorbed the truth. The quietness of my demeanor, the calm authority I radiated, was more disarming than any confrontation could have been. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't fume. I didn't yell. I just let them feel the weight of quiet, unshakable power. I let them understand, in the most profound way possible, that I had lived my life deliberately, acted decisively, and claimed my space legally and morally, without relying on anger or threats. He paced briefly, hands running through his hair, muttering under his breath, trying to find footing in a world that suddenly shifted beneath him. But the more he tried to control, the more apparent it became, he was too late. The house, the authority, the lesson, all had been quietly, carefully delivered. I turned to the window, letting the golden sunlight fall on my back, and continued in a soft, almost conversational tone. Sometimes the most powerful actions are the ones you don't announce. The ones you don't shout about. The ones you execute quietly, decisively, and correctly. He stopped pacing, and for a brief moment, I saw something in his eyes that I had waited decades to witness. Respect, fear, and awe all wrapped into one fleeting expression. Not because I had yelled. Not because I had threatened. But because I had acted with calm, deliberate authority, and that is always harder to challenge than anger. I let the silence stretch, letting every second emphasize the lesson. Patience and quiet decisiveness are far stronger than assumptions, arrogance, or entitlement. By the end of that quiet confrontation, he understood something he had never realized before. Underestimating quiet strength can cost far more than anyone expects. They thought control was theirs to keep. They were wrong. And the most powerful lessons are learned when they arrive quietly, but inevitably. The house was silent now. Not the ordinary quiet of a peaceful afternoon, but the tense, heavy silence that follows the revelation of undeniable truth. He and his wife both stood frozen, each grappling with the reality they had assumed would never happen. I remained seated at the kitchen table, my tea untouched for a moment, letting the quiet stretch. It wasn't cruelty. It wasn't pride. It was clarity delivered in its purest form. For years, he had assumed that patience, silence, and compliance meant weakness. That my calmness was vulnerability. That my quiet presence was simply background noise. But every expectation he had built on those assumptions had now crumbled silently around him. He finally found his voice, shaky and uncertain. I don't understand, how could you? I set my cup down slowly, deliberately, and looked directly at him. My tone was calm, even, almost conversational, yet every word carried the weight of decades of observation, patience, and deliberate action. I acted when it mattered. Quietly. Legally. Decisively. That's how lessons are learned. Not through yelling, not through anger, not through shouting. Through action. He swallowed hard, pacing the floor briefly, trying to regain a sense of control. But there was no ground left for him. The house was no longer the symbol of his assumed authority. My calmness was no longer mistaken for passivity. My patience was no longer confused with weakness. His wife, standing nearby, realized that the quiet woman she had underestimated had orchestrated a lesson that words alone could never deliver. She looked at him, then at me, and the subtle recognition in her eyes was unmistakable. They had misjudged me, profoundly. I rose from my chair, walking slowly to the window, letting the sunlight fall across my face, feeling the warmth seep into my skin. I wasn't triumphant. I wasn't vindictive. I was empowered. Every decision I had made, every step I had taken, had led to this moment where the truth spoke louder than anger, louder than confrontation, louder than shouting ever could. I turned slightly, meeting his gaze. You assumed I would bend, that I would comply without question. That assumption was wrong. And the reality is, you're learning that lesson now, the quiet way. He flinched slightly at the words, the truth piercing more sharply than any argument ever could. He realized, finally, that life doesn't reward assumptions, entitlement, or arrogance, it rewards clarity, decisiveness, and respect for boundaries. I looked around the room, taking in the subtle expressions of shock, realization, and begrudging respect on their faces. And in that moment, I knew something important. This wasn't just about a house. It wasn't just about money. It was about empowerment. It was about teaching them, and showing myself, that my worth had never depended on their approval. The grandchildren peeked from around the corner, witnessing the tension without fully understanding it. But they saw something far more profound. Quiet strength commands respect. Patience and observation can outmaneuver assumption and arrogance. Boundaries, when asserted calmly but firmly, are unshakable. And as the golden light of the late afternoon streamed through the windows, I felt a deep, quiet satisfaction. Not triumph over anyone. Not revenge. Just the fulfillment that comes from acting decisively, living fully, and claiming your life unapologetically. For the first time in decades, they understood. Quiet action carries power that noise cannot match. Respect is earned, not demanded. And some lessons are learned the hardest way, when delivered silently, deliberately, and undeniably. I turned back to the table, picked up my tea, and took a slow, deliberate sip.
A simple gesture, yet one that encapsulated the day's lesson. Power doesn't need drama. Strength doesn't need noise. And life rewards those who act with clarity, patience, and quiet decisiveness. They assumed control was theirs to keep. They were wrong. The most powerful lessons arrive quietly, and the ones who underestimate them learn the hardest way. I always believed silence was safer than conflict. For most of my life, it kept the peace. But that evening, I realized something painful and powerful at the same time. Silence can protect you, until it starts erasing you. After everything had settled, after the papers, after the conversations, after the realization finally sank in, the house felt different. Not empty. Not cold. Just honest. I sat alone in the living room, the same room where I had rocked my son to sleep decades ago. The same walls that had heard his laughter, his anger, his dreams. Funny how life circles back like that. People think moments like these are loud. Explosive. Full of shouting and tears. They're not. They're quiet. Painfully quiet. I could hear the clock ticking. Each second felt heavier than the last. Not because I was afraid, but because I was finally letting myself feel everything I had buried for years. I wasn't just a mother who sold a house. I was a woman who had put her dreams on hold. Swallowed disrespect to keep the family together. Convinced herself that love meant endurance. And somewhere along the way, I forgot that love should never cost you your dignity. My son thought telling me to move out was a moment of authority. To him, it was practical. Logical. Convenient. To me, it was a wake-up call I should have had years ago. I replayed his words in my head. It's time you moved out. Not, how can we make this work? Not, Mom, let's talk. Just. Eviction disguised as concern. That sentence did something irreversible inside me. It didn't make me angry. It made me clear. Clear about my value. Clear about my boundaries. Clear about the fact that I had been shrinking myself to fit into a space where I no longer belonged. And clarity is dangerous when people are used to your silence. I stood up slowly, walked to the window, and looked out at the street. Life was moving on as usual. Cars passing. Neighbors walking dogs. The world didn't stop just because. My heart cracked open. And that's when it hit me. I wasn't losing a home. I was reclaiming myself. I thought selling the house would end the story. I didn't know it was only the beginning. People always said I was strong. I used to smile when they said it, like it was a compliment. Now I know better. Being the strong one often just means you were the one everyone felt comfortable leaning on, without ever checking if you were still standing. I sat back down on the couch, the same couch where I'd spent countless nights pretending everything was fine. Where I'd nodded through conversations that didn't include me. Where I'd swallowed words because I didn't want to be that mother, the difficult one, the emotional one, the inconvenient one. That role costs more than people realize. You pay for it in silence. In tight smiles. In the slow erosion of your voice. When my son was younger, I promised myself I'd never become a burden. I worked. I saved. I stayed out of the way. I made myself small enough to fit wherever I was placed. I thought that was love. Turns out, it was training. I trained him to believe I would always adjust. Always compromise. Always take less. So when he told me it was time to move out, he wasn't being cruel in his mind. He was acting on years of patterns I had unknowingly taught him. That realization stung more than his words. Because it meant I wasn't just hurt by him. I was confronting my own history of self-abandonment. I walked into the bedroom and opened the closet. Half my clothes still hung there, untouched. Practical shoes. Neutral colors. Things chosen to blend in, not stand out. I ran my fingers along the fabric and laughed softly to myself. When did I stop choosing things for me? I whispered. There was a time when I had dreams. Big ones. Loud ones. Dreams that didn't ask permission. Somewhere between raising a child and keeping a household together, those dreams got packed away like old winter coats, saved for season that never came. But standing there, in that room, something shifted. I wasn't angry at my son anymore. I wasn't even disappointed. I was done being invisible. Strength doesn't mean tolerating disrespect. Love doesn't mean erasing yourself. And family doesn't get a free pass to hurt you just because you share blood. I realized something powerful that night. The strongest thing I could do now wasn't to argue, it was to choose myself without apology. That decision didn't come with fireworks. No dramatic speeches. Just a quiet, steady resolve settling into my bones. I packed slowly. Deliberately. Each item I folded felt like a small reclaiming of space. Of identity. Of worth. And with every box I closed, I felt lighter. Not because I was leaving. But because I was finally arriving, at myself. They thought my strength meant I would stay. They never imagined it would give me the courage to leave. That night, sleep didn't come easily. Not because I was scared, but because my mind was finally awake. I lay there staring at the ceiling, listening to the house breathe around me. Every creak, every soft sound carried a memory. Birthdays. Arguments. Quiet dinners where no one asked how I was really doing. Funny how a place can hold your entire life, and still stop feeling like home. People think starting over is for the young. For the fearless. For people who haven't already given their best years away. They're wrong. Starting over is for the brave. And bravery doesn't have an age limit. I thought about all the women like me, mothers, grandmothers, who were taught that endurance was the same thing as love. That sacrifice was the highest form of devotion. That wanting more meant being ungrateful. That mindset keeps you stuck. Because the truth is, you don't owe your silence to anyone who benefits from it. The next morning, I woke up with a strange sense of calm. The kind that comes after a storm passes, not because everything is perfect, but because you finally see clearly. I made coffee, not the way everyone else liked it, but the way I did. Strong. Hot. No compromises. It felt symbolic. I sat at the table and opened my notebook. For years, it had been a place for grocery lists, reminders, other people's needs. That morning, I turned to a blank page and wrote one sentence. What do I want now? The question scared me. Not because I didn't have answers, but because I had ignored them for so long. I wanted peace. I wanted respect. I wanted a life where my presence wasn't tolerated, but valued. That didn't mean I stopped loving my son. Love doesn't vanish because boundaries appear. If anything, real boundaries are the only thing that give love a chance to survive. But I refuse to confuse love with obligation ever again. Later that day, as I sealed the last box, I caught my reflection in the mirror. Older, yes. Softer around the edges. But there was something new in my eyes. Resolve. I wasn't running away. I was moving forward. Starting over didn't mean erasing the past, it meant refusing to let the past decide my future. And as I closed that door behind me, I realized something that took me decades to learn. Choosing yourself isn't selfish. It's survival. They thought my story ended when I packed my bags. They didn't know it was just getting good. The first few weeks after I left were quiet. Not the painful kind of quiet, the kind that lets you hear your own thoughts again. I moved into a small place. Nothing fancy. Just enough space for my things, my routines, my breath. No one knocking. No one sighing when I entered the room. No one making me feel like I had overstayed my welcome in my own life. For the first time in years, I wasn't walking on eggshells. People assume distance means coldness. But sometimes, distance is what finally makes respect possible. I noticed it in the smallest ways. I woke up when my body wanted to, not when someone else's schedule demanded it. I cooked meals I actually enjoyed. I played old music. Songs from before motherhood swallowed my identity whole. And slowly, I started to remember who I was. My son didn't call at first. I didn't expect him to. When someone believes you'll always be there no matter what, they don't feel urgency. They feel entitlement. And entitlement doesn't panic until access is gone. Weeks passed. Then one afternoon, my phone buzzed. Hey Mom, you okay? Just that. No accusations. No defensiveness. Concern. I stared at the screen for a long moment before replying. I'm doing well. I hope you are too. That was it. No explanations. No emotional labor. No rewriting history to make him comfortable. And something interesting happened. He started trying. Not with grand gestures, but with effort. Real effort. He asked before showing up. He listened instead of interrupting. He spoke to me like a person, not a responsibility. Distance had done what years of patience never could. It taught him that my presence was a privilege, not a guarantee. I won't lie, there were moments when guilt crept in. Late at night. Quiet mornings. That old voice whispering, maybe you overreacted. But then I remembered how it felt to be dismissed. To be told, directly or indirectly, that my time had passed. And I reminded myself. Peace is not something you apologize for. You don't owe comfort to people who were comfortable hurting you. I didn't move away to punish anyone. I moved away to protect what was left of me. And in doing so, I changed the entire dynamic, without raising my voice even once. That's the power of boundaries. They don't shout. They don't beg. They simply stand. When I stopped chasing respect, it finally followed me. People love neat endings. They want villains and heroes. Apologies and hugs. A perfect bow tied around pain. Real life doesn't work like that. My son never gave me a dramatic apology. No tearful confession. No speech about how wrong he was. And strangely enough, I didn't need one. What I needed was change. And that came quietly. Our relationship didn't go back to what it was. It became something new. Healthier. Honest. Limited, but real. He learned to knock before entering my space, physically and emotionally. I learned to stop over-explaining my choices. We met in the middle, not because I folded, but because I finally stood firm. And here's the part people don't talk about enough. I didn't lose my family when I chose myself. I lost the version of me that believed love required self-erasure. I filled my days with small joys. Morning walks. Fresh flowers on my table. Conversations that didn't drain me. I started wearing colors again. Saying no without guilt. Laughing without checking if it bothered anyone. I became softer with myself. And stronger with the world. Sometimes people ask me, do you regret selling the house? No. That house held memories, but it also held expectations that were suffocating me. Letting it go wasn't an ending. It was a release. I didn't walk away empty-handed. I walked away with clarity. To anyone listening to my story, especially mothers and grandmothers who've spent a lifetime putting themselves last, I want you to hear this clearly. You are not a burden. You are not too much. And it is never too late to choose dignity over familiarity. Your worth doesn't decrease with age. Your voice doesn't expire because you've been quiet for too long. If someone tells you it's time to move out of their life, take it as permission to move into your own. Because sometimes the bravest thing a woman can do is stop shrinking. And finally, stand tall. I didn't lose my family when I left that house. I found the woman I was before the world told me to disappear.